Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely.
Lovely. Okay. So I'm going to be talking to you about health and work. I'm going to say, effectively, I'm going to say three things. One is that activity is good for us. Two is that we are losing activity, and three is how we can think about returning to it. So the first one is something that everybody knows, which is that physical activity is good for the human body. Humans are designed to be rewarded. Our bodies exist in such a way that they are rewarded by movement, and this is an old system. It's a really, really, really old system. In fact, the movement versus reward system goes back to it's so deeply historic. It goes back about 500 million years to the very simplest forms of life. There's a great deal has happened to the human body. A great deal has happened to the human body since it got up on 2 feet, something between 2 to 6 million years ago. But really, so much of what's happening to the human body has accelerated in the last 150 years. And if we think about what's happening to our work, then that will give us a kind of much clearer sense of how the human body is changing at the moment. We know that sustained levels of activity are very good for the human body. We know from studies done in areas throughout the world, in Japan, in Sardinia, in Italy, in Costa Rica, that one of the main contributors to longevity is that all of these places, not only do they have no gyms, but they have environments that nudge movement, that nudge activity. So the kind of work that is done and the kind of socializing that's done means that it means that the human body enjoys sustained levels of activity throughout its the waking period of its day. So basically, people in those regions, they don't sit down a great deal. They live a very long time, but they don't sit down a great deal, like I suspect most of us are doing now. So historically, up until about the mid-19th century, people couldn't sit down to work. There wasn't really, until about 4,000 years ago, there was no work that could be done sitting down, really. Very little. And then sedentary work, we really see it starting to be introduced as a normal mode of working in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century. So if you think, everyone knows Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and Bob Cratchit, who works for Scrooge, is a bookkeeper, and he does sedentary desk work. Now, in the 1840s, Bob Cratchit's mode of employment as a sedentary desk clerk, it was incredibly rare. It was about a 20th of 1%. A 20th of 1% of the workforce did sedentary work. And unsurprisingly, this became the fastest growing workforce in the 19th century. So you cycle through a few decades and it jumps to 5%. And then by the end of the 19th century, you have nearly 500,000 people in sedentary work. Now, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any solid figures for sedentary workers in the UK. But in the US, it's estimated that about 85% of the population now do sedentary work. So that means that for about 40 hours a week, 85% of the US population, probably about the same in the UK, are inactive. People also have commutes to and from work, and that usually that's often periods of inactivity as well. And then we add on to that the leisure time that we spend sat in front of, enjoying the output of the streaming giants. It means that we are now inactive for a great deal of time. But it's not just the fact that we're inactive for a great deal of time, but even sedentary work has become more inactive. In the 1840s, Bob Cratchit would have been walking to work. He would have had big, heavy ledgers that would have been kept on shelves. So, that would involve some physical movement. But if you get fast forward to the 1960s and 1970s and 80s, you'd have been going backwards and forwards to the post room or to the photocopier or to the fax machine. But now all of those things are gone. All of that movement has been taxed away from us by technology. So actually what happens is all of our work is done behind a screen. So not only are tremendously high percentages of the population doing sedentary work, but that sedentary work has in fact become a lot more sedentary. Humans are now so sedentary that in the UK, I think this study was done by Public Health England, I think it might have been in 2017, that 41% of people in the UK aged between 40 and 60 now walk for less than 10 minutes a month. And I think it's not safe to assume that our work now has reached its lowest levels of inactivity. I think we must assume that that further inactivity is coming. That trend of inactive work is going to continue. Even in the last 12 months, a great many people now have lost the little physical activity that they had, as opposed to exercise, because people aren't commuting to work anymore. People are just commuting to different parts of their house. I teach students, and it's amazing that students are still late for seminars, even though the seminars are in their house. But anyway, we need, and this is the final thing, is that we need to be more proactive in thinking about ways in which, not that we can get humans to exercise more, because it's my feeling that we've tried that. Everybody knows the exercise guidelines, everybody knows what they should be doing, and we don't do it. What we need to do is we need to find ways of introducing more friction in modern technological lives, the kinds of friction that will encourage movement, that will nudge people into movement every 20 to 30 minutes, so that by the time people get to the ages of 55, they're not crippled by osteoarthritis, cartilage problems, or any number of the illnesses that are associated with inactivity. Basically, if you think of any of the popular causes of early death, there's a very good likelihood these are associated with inactivity. To give you one example, if you exercise for 30 minutes 3 times a week, your chances of developing colon cancer drop by 50%. That's just one example. So basically all of the diseases that you can think of, the vast majority of the diseases that you can think of are positively tackled by increased levels of activity. So the problem is work has become very sedentary. It's going to become more sedentary. Our commutes have been attenuated by COVID, but that will probably continue as well. How can we reintroduce activity into the workplace that will mean people can live not just longer lives, because there's no point living a long and morbid life, but longer lives that are also healthier.